So I pastor in a little town called Mansfield, just south of where we're at, south of the Metroplex. I'm a campus pastor there, and we serve at a church called HillCity. We've been planning it. We planted in 2019, so it'll be 5 years this February. And so I'm so excited to be with you guys. Thank you, Pastor Gabe, Pastor Vanessa, for having me tonight. And thank you guys for showing up tonight. But we're going to get in the Word. Is that okay? Be in the Word a little bit tonight? All right, cool. So we're going to be two different places. We're going to be in the New Testament. We're going to be in 1 Peter, and then we're going to be hanging out in Acts tonight. If you don't know where that is between Genesis and Revelation. So that's where we're going to be hanging out tonight. And so we're going to be in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, starting off. And it reads like this, coming out of 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. It says, be alert and of sober mind. It says, your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. As Peter is writing this, he's in what he calls Babylon, what we would know as Rome. And he's there, and literally what he's doing is what's going on in Rome. If you've ever seen The Gladiator, and you kind of know what's going on around this time, in history, the context of what's going on, Christians are literally being used as sport. They're being used in the Colosseums for the gladiators and lions. They're being ripped apart. All these things are really happening. And as Peter's writing this book to the Christian church, right? He's writing this to believers. He's writing it as a warning. Understand this. And the picture in which he writes, in the context of where they're at, is so beautiful in how he writes it. Because he puts it in a way that they can grasp and understand. In a way that they would know exactly what he's talking about. He says, hey, I'm telling you guys this. There is an enemy who wants to devour you so bad. Who wants nothing more than to see the end of you, your family, your marriage, your kids, all of those things. He's after you. And the way he does it, he does it like a lion. He's prowling around and he's looking for someone to devour. And he tells them this, be alert and of sober mind. Just be aware of what's going on. If you've ever seen those people without any kind of, social concept, they have no situational awareness about them. They're just oblivious to the world. They're on their phone and life is happening around them. He says, don't be like that. And the way he writes this is so beautiful. Because the way lions hunt is when lions begin to hunt, they don't come around the middle of what's going on. They move to the outskirts. They move on the fringe. The people that are in the back. The people that are hanging out. The people who aren't paying attention. The people who find themselves in the midst of everything that's going on. The herd has moved and they're staying somewhere else. So they go after those that are on the fringe. And he tells them this. He says, hey guys, be alert and of sober mind. Understand how the enemy is working and what his desire is to see you destroyed. And the fringe, the definition of fringe is this right here. It says the border or the outer edges of an area of a group. We see that people hang out on the fringes. We see people that all of a sudden are not fully bought in. You've heard that term, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I got options. I want to make sure that I don't get caught here. I want to make sure that I got a place to go. I want to make sure that I have an out. If I don't like it, I'm uncomfortable, or I don't want to be here any longer. I changed my mind. I want to make sure I've got options. And people like that tend to hang out on the fringes. When I was a kid, my mom used to always, she would always pray for me extra long when my dad would take me places when it would just be him and me, right? She would always pray for me because my dad is pretty forgetful, right? And I've been left, right? As a child. So my mom would always kiss me. Mijito, I love you so much, right? She would always do that. And then she'd send me away. And she'd put this little card in my pocket. And she would say this, Mijito, if you get lost, give this to the man. And I'd be like, all right, cool. And I didn't know what it was. I'm 5, 6 years old. I have no clue what this thing in my pocket is. One day I'm with my dad at Home Depot, and we're shopping around, and he goes to the next aisle, and he leaves me in the aisle that I'm at, right? And I understand that, oh my gosh, like I've been lost. If you've ever been lost as a child, it's the worst feeling. Like everything around you gets 10 times bigger, and you feel 10 times smaller. And all of a sudden, you just get that cold sweat that hits you, right? And you're just looking. You're like, dear Lord, where are you at? And you just are panicking, Dad, right? And so I'm looking for the man. That's who my mom told me to find. This obscure person, right? Find this person. She gave me a description. She didn't say what he would look like. She didn't say what he'd be wearing. She didn't say where I could find him. Simply find the man. And so I'm walking around and I pull this card out of my pocket looking to give this thing to somebody, right? And as I'm walking around, I hear my dad call for me. He yells to me, "Johnny!" And I come running out and I take off front. I got tears in my eyes. I'm scared. My dad done left me. The person who's supposed to nurture me and care for me and provide for me and never leave me has left me, right? And so I'm frustrated, I'm mad at him, and I'm crying. I'm like, "Dad, you left me." And I hand him this card. He said, "What's that in your hand?" And I hand him this card. I said, "I don't know. Mom said when you left me to give this to the man. And that if I gave it to them, they would bring me back to her." And I said, "All right, cool." So I give it to my dad, and I'm crying. And he reads this card. And I don't know what it says on it. He reads it, he gets mad, he puts it in his pocket. He says, "Let's go." We leave, we get home, and my dad's kind of frustrated at my mom, and he's kind of, just kind of perturbed at her, and I'm crying. And I just want to be with Mom. I don't want nothing to do with Dad, because Mom don't leave me nowhere. Dad does, right? So I'm insecure being with my dad. And so my mom would tell me this, we would get together, she said, "Mijito, stay close to your dad. Stay close to your dad." And I knew part of it was my fault because I left him. I understood that. So I'm afraid that I'm getting in trouble. And when we get there, my dad and my mom begin to have a conversation, and he says, "What is this?" And she says, "I gave that to him because you might leave him." And I was like, "Well, what is it?" He begins to read it off. It was my name, my phone number, and my address, with a letter from my mom that says, "If my child is found, please call me and return to this address." She had no faith in my dad, that he would be able to keep track of me. He had no faith in him. She said, "You can get lost all you want. You can find out whatever you want. But he is coming back to me." And I understood from a young age that I needed to be close to my dad. That I didn't need to be on the fringe, that I needed to be tied to what he was doing and tied into where he was going. I think many times what happens is in life is we can think we're bigger and better than we need to be. We get on the fringes of life, we get on the fringes of what we're doing, we get on the fringes of our friends groups, we get on the fringes on churches, we get on the fringes on serving. And all these things happen because we think we're bigger, we're better, and we don't need it. I think what happens is that 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 8, that line begins to cut you out and separate you away. And we see that when we hang out on the fringes, you and I are the most vulnerable. In Acts chapter 20, starting in verse 7, there's this story of Paul. And Paul's hanging out in this place called Troas. And right before this, in Acts chapter 19, Acts has been chased out of this. He's been chased out of this town. And he's been chased out of Ephesus. And the silversmiths, the union group of this place, was so mad at Paul. Because what Paul was preaching was repentance. These people were leaving, worshiping the god of Artemis. They're leaving this. And the silversmiths all banded together, and they were going to kill Paul. They wanted Paul. They caused a riot in Ephesus. And as they're rioting, they begin to chant this thing in Ephesus. Is great is the goddess of Artemis in Ephesus. And they would chant this thing for 2 hours. By the time all the officials in Ephesus were able to come together, they simply asked Paul to leave, and he narrowly escaped with his life. We see at the beginning of Acts chapter 20, Paul is hanging out, right? And they're figuring out a game plan of where they're going to go and what they're going to do. And as they're leaving Greece, the Jews are even plotting against Paul. Paul is a full-blooded Jew, a converted Pharisee, the chief of sinners as he calls himself. God meets him on the road to Damascus on his way to kill Christians, radically saved, radically changed, wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. And Paul and these people are trying to kill him. In Acts chapter 7, we find him going to this place called Troas, and he's hanging out there for 7 days. He's there for a week as they're game planning and figuring out where they're going to go the next weekend. Paul pretty much is a very controversial figure. The Romans are trying to kill Paul. The Jews are trying to kill Paul. And all he's doing is preaching the gospel. Paul doesn't know whether or not he's going to make it another day. He doesn't know if he's going to make it another week. He doesn't know if he's going to end up in prison. He doesn't know if he's going to end up dead. All Paul knows is, I have to preach the gospel. In Acts chapter 7, and in Acts chapter 20, starting in verse 7, the story begins to unfold in Troas. And we're going to be in Acts chapter 20, verse 7. And it reads like this. It says, "On the first day of the week, we came together to break bread. It says, Paul spoke to the people, and because he intended to leave the next day, he kept on talking until midnight. There were many lamps in the upstairs room where we were meeting. He says, seated in the window was a young man by the name of Eutychus, who was sinking into a deep sleep, as Paul talked on and on. When he was sound asleep, he fell to the ground from the 3rd story and was picked up dead. Paul went down, threw himself on the young man, and put his arms around him. He says, 'Don't be alarmed,' he said, 'he's alive.' Then he went upstairs again, broke bread and ate, and after talking until daylight, he left." He says, "The people took the young man home and took the young man home alive and were greatly comforted. See, Paul's here in this situation. He's preaching in trials, right? This thing's happening where they're going for a long, long time. And the way they would do this is they would get together in an upper room similar to something like this. They're meeting on the 3rd floor. And it's late because they had just eaten. They would get together. They'd break bread. They would have a big meal together. This was a special time because Paul is here. This is a big moment for them because we've got a guest speaker. Paul is here. And they're breaking bread together, and they're all gathering in the 3rd floor in the upper room. And all of a sudden, as Paul's preaching, Paul is not talking to a group of people who don't want to hear what he's saying. They are actively engaged in what Paul is saying. Paul is the kind of man that wouldn't hang around someone he wasn't wanted. Paul understands he's got to be about the Lord's business. I'm about doing the Lord's work. Understanding that he was just almost killed in Ephesus. He's been hunted by the Jews coming out of Greece, and now he's here. Paul would not waste his time with what he was doing. So we know that people were actively engaged. Most of the people were actively engaged in his teaching and what he was doing. And he's preaching until midnight. They've got kids ministry because obviously they've got this young person, their kids who are around. And we understand that this is a mixed group of people. As Paul being a Jew, there are Jews present as well as Grecians, as Greeks. Gentiles are there. Because we understand this young man's name is a Greek name. We understand he's got a mixed group, and Paul's preaching the gospel. And at about midnight, this young boy, they say in the Greek that he was neonaos, that he was between 11 and 14 years old. All of a sudden, he's sitting on the outskirts of what's going on. He's hanging out on the fringe, and he begins to fall into a deep sleep. Now, I don't know if you've ever searched on Netflix for an hour to find something to watch, and all of a sudden you found something good to watch, and the moment you put it on, you begin to what? Nod off. Happens all the time. I fall asleep doing all my favorite shows. All the time. It's the best. We'll spend an hour trying to find something to watch, and 15 minutes into it, I have no idea what's going on. Wake up, it's an hour and 15 minutes into it, you're like, what? And you have to watch it all over again. It takes me like 4 hours to watch a 50-minute show. It's awesome. It's great. I love it, right? You understand, when you fall into a deep sleep, if you've ever been driving home, you know, you got a 9-mile drive taking 45 minutes. If you've ever been driving home, and the sun's blasting in your face, and it's been a long day at work, you just begin to nod off, right? How good it feels to sit out a light and close your eyes for a second, right? Just do it, right? You love it. It feels so good. The crazy thing is this young man, he just didn't fall asleep. He just didn't pass out. He just didn't, just all of a sudden window transom was gone. It says he slipped into a deep sleep. You understand when you give it into it. You know when it's happening. You understand all of a sudden when you make the conscious decision, I'm closing my eyes. Man, I'm going to find a comfortable spot. And nobody ever falls asleep in an uncomfortable position. Nobody. I flew Spirit Airlines and I couldn't fly. I couldn't sleep because it was so uncomfortable. Right? I could feel every bump in the air. Right? I could feel the screws. I could count the screws in my back. How many were in the seat? You just could not fall asleep. Right? Because you were what? Uncomfortable. We see this young man by the name of Eutychus. They did their best to make sure that everybody would stay awake. They lit a bunch of lamps. But this young man found himself a comfortable spot on the fringe. I would imagine as he's sitting there on the 3rd story of where they're at. This had to have been a taller house. Had to have been a nice house. This had to have been a great place. And maybe he was there because he was invited by a friend. Maybe he was there because his mother made him. And he shows up just to make sure, hey, I'm being just a good kid. I'm doing my religious duty. I'm showing up, but guess what? My heart's not in it. I'm going to find a good spot on the edge. And I'm going to be looking outside to what's going on. I'm not fully engaged in what's Paul's saying. If I like it, I'll engage. If not, I've got an option. And I'd imagine he found himself a nice spot, hanging out in a window where they're at, overlooking the Sea of Cyprus, where they're at, how beautiful it must have been. Maybe as the moon is hanging over, there's a full moon over the ocean, and he's got a view of the coast. Maybe there's something going on outside of the window that's much more entertaining than this Jewish man by the name of Paul. And he found himself engaged in something else rather than what Paul's doing. And as he's done that, as he's been distracted, as he's in this moment, he begins to sink into a deep sleep. Gives into it, hanging out on the fringe, sitting on a window, nice cool breeze. I am comfortable. This is where I want to be. This is great. They can do whatever they want to. Paul can go as long as he wants. Guess what? I'm good. I'm going to take me a nap. And that joker falls out the window. Could you imagine being the kids minister that day? You're in charge of the kids, right? You're in charge of the kids. You are the one. Everybody check in. You got your little name tag. Here we go, right? Could you imagine being the kids pastor? Paul, got a little bit of a problem. Is Eutychus' mom here? That's me. Hey, you mind talking for a second? Your boy's laying on the ground outside. 3 stories down. Pretty sure he's dead. You know what I'm saying? Like, could you imagine being that guy? Could you imagine that? Could you imagine having the weight of kids ministry? You're responsible. That is on you. You got fired that day. You're updating your LinkedIn, your resume, all the above. You're gone, right? You're out. Paul, without skipping a beat, goes down and he throws himself upon this young boy and he raises him to life. And Paul did this. It was very specific the way Paul did this. Coming out of 1 Kings chapter 17, you have Elijah, and she's hanging out with this widow lady and her boy. And the boy ends up dying. And Elijah lays his body on himself 3 times and raises this young man to life. Paul is doing this in a very similar manner, giving him the authority, showing to the Jewish people who would understand and know the Old Testament. They would know this, that this man is operating in that same power as Elijah. Raised this young man to life. Right? Could you imagine the highs and the lows of life? Where all of a sudden you look out the window. Your boy is laying there dead from the 3rd floor. You got a lot of stairs to go down, right? Little stairs, itty bitty stairs, right? And you're running down there and you try to get to your boy. He's hanging out, the cats are licking his face, right? The birds are already picking his eyeballs. I mean, this is happening. He is dead. Luke is a physician who's recording this, who would have the absolute authority to declare somebody dead. He is dead. Gone. Your son, you are now down one room. One member in your family. Your younger son is going to take your room. This is happening in real time. Dead. You're going home with one less person. Right? The Kia ride's a little different now. Right? There's a little bit more elbow room. This is happening. Did you imagine the highs and lows of the family? We showed up here, we came to church, and my boy fell out the window. It's wild to see this happen. Paul runs down 3 flights of stairs, lays himself on this boy, picks him up. He is alive. Paul, if it was me, we'd call it the night. Like, look, guys, I'm done. You know what I'm saying? Paul goes back upstairs, eat a couple tacos, and goes preaching again. He goes right for it. What's crazy is this young man found himself in a spot he shouldn't have been in. He should have been fully engaged in what was going on. Nobody else fell out of a window. I'm sure there was multiple windows. No one else recorded fell in a deep sleep. It was a deep sleep. It's a good sleep. You know what I'm saying? And then when you have that dream where you're falling and you wake yourself up, like those terrible dreams, this is that good sleep. When you're just like, bro, the air conditioner's hitting just right. The fan is, oh my gosh, the blankets are nice, right? The mattress hits different. You got a new pillow. Oh, it's good. That good sleep, right? The kids are passed out. You know, just, oh my gosh. That vacation sleep, you ever had that? After the beach sleep, you ever had that? That's money. That's the sleep he's got. And he's loving it, man. Oh my gosh, this is money, right? And he's in that good sleep. And he's gone. Falls out a window. See, what happens is many of us can get comfortable hanging out on the fringe. We get really comfortable having options. Well, I don't need to be fully in because I'm good enough. I showed up, Pastor. I'm here. I'm good. I checked my religious duty. Let me tell you something. There's not going to be a perfect attendance award in heaven. That's not something they're handing out. They're after your heart. He don't need you showing up for religious duty. He needs you showing up so you look good for Pastor Gabe and Pastor Vanessa. He needs your heart. That's what he's after. There's a couple of things I want you guys writing down on how we can avoid hanging on the fringe. So some signals that you know of if you've been hanging out on the fringe. Say, am I on the fringe? How am I living? Am I on the fringe? I want you to write these 3 things down. These little fringe signals, a little test to figure out whether or not you're hanging out on the fringe. Number 1 is this right here. Is you become overly critical. You become overly critical. Everything you critique. Everything you're after. Everything you can do. And guess what? You can no longer receive because of it. Because you've been overly critical. You criticize everything. Why do they do it that way? Why do I have to do it like that? Why are they making me do this? Why are they making me wear that? Why do I have to wear the name tag? Why do I got to check in? Why do I do this? You become overly critical. And you begin to question everything. And guess what? You can no longer receive. The second thing is this right here. You can check this out. Is it becomes no longer a priority. Where small group is no longer a priority. When we're NWLA, the 101 classes that Pastor Gabe was talking about, no longer become a priority. We're showing up on a Sunday night is no longer a priority. Where you got these things, well, if it fits in my schedule, if it works for me, if it's convenient for me, then you're hanging out on the fringe. So some areas you can go ahead and look at and say, that's me. That's where I'm at. It's no longer become a priority. Well, if it fits, if it works for me, if I'm available that night, if my show's not on, if the new season doesn't launch, if this or that doesn't happen, if the kids aren't too cranky, the kids are this, let me tell you something, your kids are never going to be ready for it. There's never going to be a perfect moment. If you're waiting for it, it's never going to show up. It's never going to be there. It's a decision you make on purpose. It's an intentional decision you make. The third thing is just right here, just a fringe signal, is you begin to start to compare things. You get into that comparison, starting to compare. Well, so-and-so does it like this. Well, why do we have to do it like that? Well, they do it this way, not like that better. Why does it happen like this? Because they do it like that. Could you imagine if you begin to compare your wife to other wives? If you begin to do that and say, hey, well, babe, why don't you cook like she does? I won't pick up your clothes. You know what I'm saying? Like, why don't you do your laundry? You know what I'm saying? Like that's real. But when you think about it, you begin to compare. You begin to say, well, I really don't like the way they do it here. I really don't like, I wish they would do it that way. If they did it that way, I'd be in. Well, that's not it at all. That's not it at all. You either are or you aren't. You either are or you aren't. So there's some fringe signals that you can say, am I hanging out on the fringe? Is that where I'm at? Have I made myself comfortable being on the outside? Have I made myself comfortable? Am I drawing myself away? Right? Because we see Eutychus, it didn't happen all at once. Eutychus, when he walked in the room, he found the spot. When he walked in the room, he said, that's where I want to be. Oh my gosh, I can look out the window if I'm bored in here. Money. Like, I can get a breeze. It's so hot in here. Oh my gosh, so stuffy. Oh, I don't want to be here. Man, that person smells, right? All of these things are real. And he's sitting there and he finds a spot. From the very beginning, he scouted out where he wanted to be. That's where I'm going to be. I'm going to be on the outside. I'm going to be there. And he settled in. He just didn't sit. He got himself comfortable. You know what it's like to wiggle, to move, to borrow someone's jacket, put it in your lumbar, right? Get a little bit of, hey man, scoot the thing over here. You put your feet up, prop your feet up. Oh, you know what it's like to make yourself comfortable. And he did everything he needed to do to make himself comfortable where he was at on the fringe. It's a process that happens. I'm not saying that every single one of you guys are in this spot. I'm not saying that every single one that this is the only way to tell. I'm just saying it's something to look out for, because guess what? It's a process that happens. If you find yourself being a little more critical, you say, hold on, look, I feel like I'm getting out on the fringe. If you find yourself beginning to compare a little, you say, hold on, I find I'm getting myself out on the fringe. You can come back and look and say, hey, this is a process that happens. What am I doing? I need to reevaluate where I'm going and what I'm doing. So how do we avoid the fringe? How do we avoid that? I want you guys to write this down. How to move out of the fringe. How to make sure we're not hanging out on the outskirts of what God's doing, but to be right up in the middle of everything that He's got for you. The first thing is this right here, is you have to move out of comfortable spaces. You've got to move out of the comfortable spaces and get yourself in the spots that, guess what, aren't as comfortable. We love comfort. Oh my gosh, we absolutely love it. I have a car right now that has air-conditioned seats. I love it. When it's 103 degrees outside and you can bake cookies in your car, oh my gosh, I love those air-conditioned seats, right? It's fantastic, right? It's awesome. But to say I will not drive a car without it is foolish. To say I won't ever do that, that's crazy. So we have to begin to move ourselves out of what is comfortable, out of those comfortable spaces. In Luke chapter 8, verse 42, there's a story of this lady with an issue of blood. She begins to go and she finds Jesus, and in Luke chapter 8, verse 42, it reads like this. It says that as Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subjected to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. So this lady has a major issue for 12 years. Over a decade, this lady has had this issue, this bleeding, this feminine issue that she has had. She hears about Jesus coming, and she says, I've got to get to him. This wasn't make an appointment with Jesus. It wasn't go online and book your appointment, and Jesus is going to visit you via telehealth. It wasn't anything like that. This was, she had to make a decision. Get up in the morning, put your sandals on. Get up in the morning, do your makeup. Get up in the morning and say, hey man, I'm looking at the traffic report. It's insane. So many people are here. But guess what? She had to move out of a comfortable space and to get what she wanted, to what she needed. She had to first say, all right, look, I'm strapping on my sandals and I'm going. And all the excuses that come with it. Oh my gosh, we love excuses. I love excuses too. They're great, right? They're awesome. They're fantastic. But guess what? Excuses get you nowhere. When we see that all the excuses that she would have had, her kids telling her mom is so packed, you're never going to see him. You're never going to get to him. You think he's going to talk to you? You think he even knows who you are? Dude, it's been 12 years, Mom. This is what it is. 12 years. You've seen the best of the best. For 12 years, we spent so much money trying to get you something that's never happened. Mom, it's impossible. Could you imagine that day, in telling yourself, psyching yourself up in your brain, today's the day. Today it's going to happen. Jesus is going to heal me. Today it's going to happen. You know how crazy it must have been to move out of that house, to begin to take the first steps down to finding where Jesus is going to be. And guess what? We didn't have his route. We didn't know where he was going. You had to guess. You had to find him. You had to move. And we see that the crowds were so thick, they were almost crushing Jesus. It's crazy. Talk about uncomfortable. But guess what? If we're going to move out of the fringe, then we have to get out of those comfortable spaces. This lady, guess what? If she wouldn't have found Jesus, she would have died with this issue. It would have been 24, 48, 60 years, whatever it would have been her lot. But it ended that day because she moved out of a comfortable space. She stepped out of her house and went and found Jesus where he was. The second thing is just right here about moving out of the fringe is we have to keep a reverence for the Word. You have to keep a reverence for the Word. When we're in youth ministry, my wife and I, we planted our youth ministry at our church. And we get these church kids that just knew the Word, right? Because guess what? They've been raised in church. And sometimes with us, the Word can get so common that it just seems to be whatever. Pastor Gabe brings the Word, you say, well, I've heard that before. And so guess what we do? We change the station, we tune out. And we hit up that TikTok, right? Like, check it out. It's got captions now, so you have to turn the volume on, right? You scroll through, right? What are you doing? Reading scripture? Okay. Right? So I was like, I was doing liking TikTok videos. I know that. Why'd you send me an Instagram message while I was preaching? I've had that happen before. It's like, they said, all of a sudden I see the notification. I was like, dude, you don't even read the Bible, bro. Come on, we're in the Word. We have to keep a reverence for the Word. This is what it says right here in Isaiah chapter 55:11. So is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but it will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent. Proverbs chapter 1 verse 7 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. John 6:35, it says, and Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Psalms 119:105, it says, your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Jeremiah 23 verse 29, it says, it is not my word like fire, declares the word, and like a hammer that breaks rocks into pieces. Our spirit man desires the Word. What we beat back the enemy with is the Word. We have to keep a reverence for His Word. It can't be common to us. When we dial in and we read it, man, it has to be this thing. Lord, I keep a reverence for you. The moment it becomes common, guess what? It loses its power. The moment it just becomes words, the moment it just becomes a book, the moment it just becomes duty, the moment it just becomes this thing that I have to do, it begins to lose its power. I love watching documentaries, man. I'm a huge documentary guy. If I go watch a movie and learn something, that's a win for me. And I was watching this thing on Discovery Channel about this man that lived with these lizards. It's a weird guy, super strange guy. But he lived with a bunch of these lizards. And he had like 30 lizards that he lived with, these big giant monitor lizards. And he kept his apartment at 85 degrees. And his neighbors would always claim, and they would complain that it stunk so bad, his apartment would. We worked at a mechanic shop, and he would show these guys these pictures of these lizards. They were big. They were like 4-foot-long lizards. And he would live with them outside of the cages. And he would tell those guys at work, he would show these pictures, look at these lizards or whatever. And they would always ask him, aren't you scared of these lizards? Like, no, they love me. They know me. Right? To live with all these lizards, man. And he said one of the guys they interviewed said he invited me over, and he would sit down. These lizards would come crawl on him and like lick him. And he said they would like snap at him. He'd push them away and kind of like discipline these lizards. Well, one day he didn't come into work. And another day he didn't come into work. And another day he didn't come into work. So 4 days later, they called the cops. They say, hey man, you go do a wellness check on this weird guy that lives over there. So go do the welfare check on the lizard man. And they go in there and they knock on the door and nothing happens. And they're knocking. Finally, they try to bust down the door and they push it open. And the dude is laid up against the door, dead. The lizard's been eating on that dude for 4 days. It's crazy. They said it was one of the gruesomest scenes they'd ever walked into. But this guy literally lost respect for these wild animals. And they had become common to him, and because they become common to him, they begin to consume him. See, when we lose a reverence for the Word and it simply just becomes another thing, then man, we're missing out on a major, major portion of your spirit, man, and what it needs. Man, we have to keep a reverence for the Word. If we're going to stay in the middle of what God's doing, off of the fringes, and in the middle of what the Lord's doing, we have to keep a reverence for the Word. The third thing is this right here, is don't have a divided heart. You can't have a divided heart. You know this, you take a sit on the fridge, sit on the outside. He was watching what was going on outside the window. He was not engaged in what Paul was saying. Had really no interest in what was going on. He was looking outside the window. I think many of us have that. We have options. 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I'm going to do just enough. Just enough, man. I'm going to make it into heaven. We're going to be good. I'll see you when we get there. But I'm not going all the way in. I'm not serving. I'm not going to start a small group. Man, I'm not going to pursue this. I'm not going to pursue that. Why? Because guess what? I'm in love with this and that. The Lord's calling us not to have a divided heart. To be fully into what He's doing. To be totally engaged in what the Lord's doing. Man, if you're serving NWLA, then serve it with everything that you've got. Man, plug in with everything that you have. Yeah, I'm just telling Pastor Gabe, I believe that everything NWLA has in Pastor Gabe's heart, what he's given him, the answers for everything he has is in this room right now. Amen. That there's giftings in you. There's abilities that you have. There's a word that the Lord's put in your heart. There's a testimony that you have. There's something that you have that, guess what? He's praying for. He's needing. And guess what? It's locked up inside of you. Why? Because you got a divided heart. He said, I don't know if I'm fully in. I don't know if I really want to. I don't know if I want to do this. I don't know if I want to do that. And Pastor keeps praying, Lord, send the people. Lord, give me what I need. And guess what? I believe the Lord saying, what you need is here in this room. Amen. These people say, hey, I'm in. Pastor Gabe, whatever you need. Whatever you need, I've got you. Whatever you need, I'm serving you. I believe in what New Wave is doing right here in Downey. I believe what the Lord is doing in LA. And I believe in the vision that the Lord gave you. Not that Pastor Gabe's the only one that can hear from God. Not that Pastor Gabe has the answer for all of LA. But I'll tell you this, he's put a word in his heart for this city, for this church. And I promise you, as you begin to plug in and as you begin to serve, not only will you unlock what God needs in NWLA, but I guarantee you this, you begin to discover things about yourself that you never knew. We can't have a divided heart. In the spring of 1519, there was the Spanish sailor by the name of Hernán Cortés. And he sailed out of Spain. They were going to come, and they ended up landing would be on the eastern coast of Mexico, the western coast of Mexico. They began to land there. And as they landed there, they stopped at a couple places, and then people began to tell them, man, let me tell you something. Where you're going is super difficult. Where you're going is going to be really hard. When they finally got to the Spanish conquistadors, they landed there. They began to go and conquer land, and guess what? It was much more difficult than what they had thought. It was much harder than anything they had ever anticipated. Disease, jungle, people, all the above, it's terrible. And so the people hated so much that they were planning in the middle of the night, they were literally planning a coup to begin to leave Cortez there. They said this, man, we got ships, we know what we're doing, we're going to leave. Because guess what? We got options. I understand that that's what he wants to do. I understand if he wants to die here in some foreign land, but let's go back to Spain. Let's get the heck out of here. These men had a divided heart. They did not want to be where they were at. They were dreaming of something else. And so Cortez got word of what was going on. And he did such a boss move. What he ended up doing was he ended up calling and making the men that were going to leave, the men that were going to run a coup, the people that were going to mutiny what he was doing, he made them burn the ships. And as he lit those things, he forced their heart to be right where we're at. The Lord will not do that for you. We have free will. But guess what? As we choose and as we understand, Lord, I'm fully in here, I guarantee you something ignites in you. As you begin to say, Lord, I'm serving here. I'm not hanging out on the fringe. Lord, I'm going to be right in the middle of what you're doing. Lord, I'm going to be tight and close to you. Lord, I'm serving you. Lord, I'm keeping a reverence for your word. Lord, I'm moving out of the comfortable spaces and I'm moving in right to where you're at. And as you begin to move into that, man, you begin to move into the blessing of the Lord, the favor of God. I'll tell you this, I've served from the moment we got married, even before that. My kids, man, all the above, dragging them back and forth to church, all of these things. And I tell you this, both my kids, I can take with full heart, full confidence, they love Jesus. They love Jesus. Man, they pray for people, lay hands on people. That's my kids. My wife, our relationship is so incredibly blessed. We live in a house that there's no way we could afford in the natural. But I tell you this, I serve a supernatural God. And as we serve and as we give, He gives back and He serves back. And He gives us the favor right back to us. And I'll tell you this, there's no place I'd rather be, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how insecure I would be, than right in the middle of what the Lord's doing. There's not a place I'd rather be.